So, thank you, Leonora. Primarily in Pakistan, the recent trends, and when I say recent trends, I'm talking the last 4 or 5 years, is primarily of two categories. One, where the dispute is actually raised by the upstream power sector or even energy sector entities. Process, primarily how we've been dealing with it, is that the arbitration system, which is actually raised, takes it to primarily exit, and thereby an award comes in. Once the award comes in, what trend recently been developed is after the award, the government negotiates based on the ceiling that comes in from the award to something which settles either the amount in kind or reduce the amount itself. That's trend one. We've seen it in Karke, we've seen it in Recodic, as mentioned by Chopa Saab in the last session. We've seen it in many other arbitrations that are, many other settlements that went ahead in the same process. There are few that I'm working on with the government right now, and they are also in the same line of, let's say, dispute resolution. So primarily, there is a ceiling out there, and that ceiling is somewhat reduced in a negotiation or negotiated settlement. And that process aside, the second group of, or let's say the kind of negotiation that is taking place in the last few years with the power producers is the somewhat renegotiations of contracts. Pakistan in 2020 went ahead and renegotiated with the IPPs, almost 47 of them renegotiated their contracts. I was part of the negotiation team in that process. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the processes that we used in that negotiation was the old way of negotiation, which is a win-lose format of negotiation. And that particular category, which is primarily called the distributive negotiation form, that gives the incentive only to one party and not to the other. So the process of the recent form of negotiations, which is called the principal negotiation, which is getting more substance around the globe, we've not yet achieved that category. So primarily in both the scenarios, what is common is that the government of Pakistan either negotiates based on a ceiling downwards, or primarily converting it into services rather than payment in kind, or negotiate a win-lose contract whereby you renegotiate the terms of a contract that you should have primarily negotiated in the first go. The basic theme or basic reason for that, what I've realized in these processes, and I was part of these processes in the last 4 or 5 years, is the anti-graft laws of Pakistan. So when it is public sector negotiating with the government negotiating with the producers, it is always seen in the light of future investigations that may entail very, very rigorous and long punitive criminal investigations. And I know of certain individuals in the government sector were facing anti-graft laws and investigations for 16 years at least. So that's the process why we are having this impediment where we cannot go into the modern form of negotiations, where we preempt a dispute and resolve it. Rather, we exhaust the remedies in terms of an adjudicated form, and then kind of resolve the matter. So first, I'd like to kind of discuss the term overregulation. Now, overregulation itself is a relative term. One might or might not consider the power sector at this given moment overregulated, rightly regulated, or underregulated. What we can actually see is how the regulator is acting, and whether the regulator is acting maturely or immaturely based on the regulations that are available to it. The main regulator in the power sector is NEPRA. And what I see is that ever since its inception, since 1997, it is somewhat in the learning phase. So it is still learning how to regulate the power sector. And this learning has cost us many litigations and many, let's say, adverse outcomes. Now, I've also seen that the regulator is regulating in somewhat in a pendulum form. So sometimes it is over-vigilant, and sometimes it is under-vigilant. And this process of inconsistency also leaves a lot of space for manipulation in terms of the regulatees. So as far as over-regulations are concerned, I think the major issue for the regulator right now is consistency in its approach towards how it wants to regulate, how much it wants to regulate, and in what sphere it should be regulating. So one recent example would be the new coal industry that was coming up. Now, the regulator in the beginning was extremely lenient in terms of coal buying, and then immediately it went from extreme leniency to extreme regulatory vigilance over coal buying. Now, there has to be some middle ground in the extreme leniency and the extreme vigilance, and that is what needs to be achieved in terms of regulations. And that also brings us to the second point in the overregulation sphere, and that is the relationship of the regulator with the policymakers. Now, primarily the regulator was brought in to regulate the pricing of power sector in the rational manner, so that it takes away burden from the policy makers to either satisfy or dissatisfy its voters. That role has somewhat reversed now. So at this given moment, policy makers, due to IMF pressure or whatever, are more rational in their approach towards pricing than the regulator who was supposed to be doing that. So what I'm trying to say, come at is there is this maturity required by the regulator rather than more regulations or under regulations for that matter. So I have 2 or 3 suggestions in that. Primarily, the first and foremost, the major issue in the form of dispute resolution that we are undertaking right now, I've come to this conclusion that with the anti-graft laws that are there existing, there will always be either a win-lose form of negotiation coming up, or we will be negotiating a ceiling which is never a good thing in terms of we would already have lost an arbitration. Now, to do that, we either need to define the process in which the government functionaries take up the decision to negotiate or not to negotiate. And that can be done either by bringing in legislative measures or judiciary defining good faith. And it's not just defining good faith, but also protecting good faith in that regard. Once that is done, only then public functionaries would venture into resolving disputes preemptively rather than reactionary. In addition to that, what I believe is that, especially my experience with in negotiations with the IPPs, I believe that a state or a country should not renegotiate contracts based on bad bargains in the beginning. So if the country has made a bad bargain, that should not be a ground for renegotiating contracts. That's not how states react. States should only negotiate contracts if there are flaws in the contract or manipulatory procedures that are undertaken by the, let's say, the regulatees. And that's the second, let's say, suggestion that I would be giving.